to be here. What an honor. Thank you. When I was in college, I was a Phyllis Schlafly fanboy, and so excited when at 25 she invited me on the radio to talk about my book. I couldn't even believe it. I thought I died and went to heaven. So it's a great honor to be with you guys. Thank you. Before I start talking about China, I don't have it on my monitor here, but we'll go to that. But I want to tell you guys about my grandpa real quick. Interesting guy. I'm sure you guys know people like him. He's one of those lifelong Republicans, and election comes around, he doesn't bother researching, you don't got to figure out who's who, he just Republican. And then 2020 comes along and we find out he voted for Joe Biden. That's what we said. Like, what? What is wrong with Grandpa? Emergency family meeting, and we didn't have to talk long before we all realized this never would have happened if Grandpa was still alive, right? But he moved to Chicago, voted 20 times, and so... No, in all seriousness, folks, they are stealing elections, and we need to be very clear about that. And they're going to try to do it again, but we're going to push back like crazy. Now, one of the existential threats to our country is what's happening with communist China. And not enough people are talking about it. I actually just got back from the UN Summit of the Future, and all the press had to have minders, and you're probably not surprised to know that my minders were communist Chinese agents. True story. And they got really mad at my colleague when he tried to take a picture of some weird Soviet art. So I've dealt with these guys for a long time. I actually had the interior minister for the CCP write to one of my editors a nasty letter about me saying I'm anti-Chinese. Not anti-Chinese. I love the Chinese. I just don't like the gangsters who've enslaved the country. But what I'm going to share with you today is the fact that they are making all this progress with the deliberate connivance of people in our country at the highest levels. In 2011, Barack Obama invited the dictator of China, Hu Jintao, over, and they put out a joint statement where Obama said, "We reiterate that we welcome a strong, prosperous, and successful China that plays a greater role in world affairs." And of course, that's exactly what's happening. The Communist Chinese actually played a crucial role, that's their term, in what's called the 2030 Agenda, the Sustainable Development Goals, what the UN leadership called the Master Plan for Humanity. And imagine God had a good chuckle about that, Master Plan for Humanity, right? Now, when you look at the UN, they've got all these specialized agencies. There's 15 of them. About 1/3 are led by actual card-carrying members of the CCP. For perspective, an American leads one of them, okay? And it's very different when a CCP agent goes to a UN agency than when an American does. Everybody has to take an oath that they're going to forget their country, they're going to forget their political party, they're going to be international civil servants, and their only concern is humanity. And yet, the CCP is very open about the fact that you better serve the motherland, and if you don't, you're in big trouble. You want to know how big a trouble you'll be in? The president of Interpol, it's a wannabe global police agency, was a member of the CCP, Meng Hongwei. And he went back to China, and he was arrested. And the CCP, he actually has diplomatic immunity, so I don't even know how they did that. But he was arrested, and the CCP put out a statement saying one of the reasons they arrested him was that he wasn't faithfully following the orders of the Communist Party of China. Isn't that interesting? Why wouldn't you want to put a CCP guy in charge of the global police department? So we have, even when you're not at the top level, like another good example is UNESCO, the UN education agency that wants to brainwash all your kids to be good little global citizens. The top boss is just a regular old socialist, but the deputy top boss is a member of the CCP, Mr. Xing Ku. He's the deputy director general, and guess what he oversees? Education. So you wonder, why are they teaching communism to the kids in our local public school? Well, this is one of the reasons, right? The instructions are coming from the top. They're also pushing for a one world currency. They've been doing so very, very openly. Back in 2009, the head of the Chinese central bank, they call it the People's Bank of China, put out a report calling for a super sovereign reserve currency. Basically, get rid of the dollar as the global reserve currency and move toward a one world currency issued and managed by maybe the IMF. He talked about using the special drawing rights as a substitute for the dollar in international affairs. Now, that would be bad enough, but the head of the U.S. Treasury Department at that time, Timothy TurboTax Geithner, he didn't pay his taxes because TurboTax. You try that and see what happens. True story. He is standing up in front of the Council on Foreign Relations, and he's asked about this Communist Chinese proposal to move away from the dollar and move toward a one world IMF-issued global currency. And listen to what he says. So I've got the video here so you can see it. If we can get the volume on that, that'd be amazing. Thanks, guys.
IMF regulations, the new IMF idea about, the general agreements to borrow and having a forecast their ability to disperse to the emerging markets?
On the first question, I haven't read the governor's proposal. He's a very thoughtful, very careful, distinguished central banker.
Imagine him saying that
Generally
about
find him
Trump.
sensible in every issue. But as I understand this proposal, it's a proposal designed to increase the use of the IMF's special drawing rights. We're actually quite open to that suggestion. But you should think of it as rather evolutionary, building.
We're quite open to that. Right? Who needs the dollar as the global reserve currency? Do you have any idea what would happen if and when the dollar loses its place as the global reserve currency? Your standard of living will go down faster than it has been going down. You can't even begin to imagine. Now, the CCP is now the largest contributor to the UN's so-called peace military. These are the people infamous around the world for raping women and children, about 60,000 just in the last decade, based on UN numbers. They are completely taking over the intellectual property system. I've done a lot of articles about this in the Epic Times and other places. When whistleblowers try to expose what's happening, they're persecuted. So this lady that I interviewed, a very nice lady, Irish lady, she was working in the UN Human Rights Council, and she found out that the bureaucrats at the Human Rights Council were informing the CCP about Chinese dissidents who were coming to testify against them. Say, hey, this guy's going to come testify. Don't let him leave the country. Torture his mother until he stops talking. Right? And so this lady tries to blow the whistle, and she's marched out of her office, just like all the other whistleblowers at the UN. The head of the IMF at the time said, hey, the way things are going, we're going to put the IMF headquarters in Beijing. Okay? The Paris Agreement. I was there when they negotiated the Paris Agreement. What a fraud. And this is when it first hit me. It is provable that they're lying about man-made global warming, and they don't even believe it themselves. Right? Barack Obama says, I'm going to slash American CO2 emissions by 33% in the next 15 years. We're going to shut down power plants, shut down energy exploration. The Communist Chinese said, yes, we're going to keep increasing our CO2 emissions indefinitely. We'll try to peak them maybe in 2030, but we'll see what happens. Now, think about this for 1 minute. If you actually believe the ridiculous proposition that CO2 is toxic pollution that's going to destroy the planet, the worst thing in the world that you could do is shut down American energy, shut down American manufacturing, and ship it all to Communist China, where they're going to power it with dirty coal-fired power plants. They're building 2 a week, by the way. And yet all these clowns are clapping and patting each other on the back for saving the world. Right? This is an effort to deindustrialize and destroy the United States and the Western world. By the way, their CO2 emissions, if you can see the purple line right there, that's Communist China. We are the orange line right there. So they're way ahead of us. Anybody who thinks that shutting down the American economy and sending it all to China is going to save us from global warming is an idiot. I just don't know what else to tell you. Okay. So the CCP, they have their own organizations that are working to build global governance. They've got a lot of them. We won't have time to get into them all, but they're very clear about what they're doing. If you read their declarations, when the BRICS get together, when the G77 plus China, it's 134 member governments of the UN, when they get together, they'll tell you in very plain English, we want to empower the United Nations, sorry. We want more power to enforce UN mandates. We want a global currency. We want a global police force. We want a global military. We want everybody to obey the global courts. They say it openly in their own documents. Right? We stress the importance of the central role of the United Nations in global economic governance. This was at the G77 plus China meeting in Bolivia, 2014. The title of the declaration and the summit was Toward a New World Order to Live Well. And by that, they mean they're going to live well. You, not so much. You'll be lucky to live, okay? They said in the declaration, we recognize the UN needs to improve its capabilities and capacities to fully implement its mandates. Go read the Pact for the Future that every government in the world, including yours, just allowed to pass by consensus. It will terrify you. And the CCP loves it. I got an article appearing in the Epic Times probably later today. They're bragging that they played a key role in developing it. They're saying this is the path to a harmonious global future for humanity. And when a communist Chinese operative, they've murdered more people than any other government in the history of the world, whenever one of them says that, you should run. So they're very, very open about what they're doing. They're taking over the UN. They just created the School of Global Governance at Beijing Foreign Studies University to train up an army of these minions to go into the international institutions and take them over. And I actually reached out several times to Assistant U.S. Secretary of State for International Organization Affairs, Kevin Moley, during the previous administration. And of course, I talked to him this morning. He says this is happening with the deliberate connivance of the U.S. State Department, all the Obama holdovers, the Hillary holdovers, etc. And he says this is the fight for our lives. It is a struggle between the West and communist China. And I want to spend a little time today on those in our country who are helping this happen. It's not a new phenomenon. In fact, it goes back to the very beginning. But let's start with David Rockefeller. David Rockefeller was a really bad guy. You know, the old joke was, why doesn't he run for president? Well, he doesn't want a demotion. And he wrote in the New York Times in 1973. He said, the social experiment in China under Chairman Mao's leadership is one of the most important and successful in human history. They'd murdered about 50 million of their own people by that time. What kind of psychopath thinks that's a successful social experiment? Read the whole column. It is monstrous. Okay, now George Soros, who's put more money into our political process than just about anybody in the history of our country, had some really interesting thoughts on communist China. Listen. Oh, sounds like we don't have that video, huh?
What sort of a financial deal should Obama be seeking to strike when he travels to China next month?
No, I think this would be the time, because you really need to bring China into the creation of a new world order, financial world order. They are kind of reluctant members of the IMF. They play along, but they don't make much of a contribution because it's not their institution. Their share is not commensurate. Their voting rights are not commensurate to their weight. So I think you need a new world order that China has to be part of the process of creating it, and they have to buy in. They have to own it the same way as, let's say, the United States owns the Washington Consensus, the current order.
Yeah, what could go wrong, right? We just put the most murderous dictatorship in the history of humanity. They can own the New World Order. And yeah, what could possibly go wrong, right? Anybody think that's a good idea? Okay, thank you. In 2010, he said communist China had a better functioning government than the United States. Said that in an interview with the Canadian media. Now, Rockefeller hired, of course, Henry Kissinger, who hired Klaus Schwab. You can kind of see the chain of command there, Satan, Rockefeller, right? But I want to show you Rockefeller. He's a big believer in this, too.
Filling out China at a public venue, the Chinese official...
I'm sorry, guys. Somehow the videos got messed up. They're not clipped where they should be. But he actually says, yes, communist China needs to play a major role in creating this new world order, as he says. Bill Gates, during COVID, said communist China is the role model for the new world order.
Once the government was fully engaged in the second half of January, the idea of reducing that contact, the quarantine...
Yeah, we got the videos cut at the wrong places. But here is Klaus Schwab, founder of the World Economic Forum.
In the APEC this year, both the leaders meeting and also the APEC CEO summit, you just spoken at the opening panel, Professor. So how do you see we would be able to, with our capability, to carry on this kind of discussion in the right direction?
We have to define specific element.
I'm sorry, guys. The videos somehow all got messed up. But in that interview, and if we had more time, I'd play the whole thing for you. He says that communist China is a role model for many countries, and it's a great country, and we need to follow them and what they do.
Now, there's a lot of
in that video, you have the head of the UN and Klaus Schwab bragging about how the communist Chinese youth are going to lead the world into the future. We have a lot of these world leaders saying similar things. I'll show you our neighbor to the north, Justin Trudeau, sorry. And he's got some interesting things to say, too, about communist China.
Justin Trudeau raised a lot of money at a Liberal fundraiser last night, but he also paid a high political price. First, it was the actual invite to the women's only event, criticized for not taking female voters seriously. Now it's Trudeau's actual words, the message he relayed to the crowd. The Liberal leader praised China for its dictatorship. CTV's Deputy Bureau Chief in Ottawa, Laurie Graham, has the details.
Justin Trudeau commands a room, especially one filled with adoring women. But he still doesn't seem to have command of the issues. Here's what he said when asked which nation's administration he admired most.
There's a level of admiration I actually have for China. Because basic dictatorship is allowing them to actually turn their economy around on a dime.
He talked about...
Wow, isn't that nice? Their basic dictatorship is just so nice because they can turn their economy around. And forget the millions of people that they've slaughtered and continue to hold in re-education camps, torture, chop out their body organs. They got a good, efficient economy. So this actually goes back a long way. If you look, the U.S. State Department played a critical role in betraying U.S. ally Chiang Kai-shek and handing that country over to the communists. It's a horrifying history. I highly encourage you to learn it. Many of our officials knew this. Even back in 1935, the U.S. ambassador to Moscow relayed to the U.S. State Department what the Soviets were hoping, that the U.S. would get embroiled in a war with Japan, that the Soviets could come in at the very end, capture all the stockpiles and weapons that they had in Manchuria, and use that to take over all of China for communism. The U.S. government helped facilitate this process with very, very wicked people in high places. Our General Patrick Hurley, who was the U.S. ambassador to China at the end of World War II, said American diplomats surrendered the integrity and political independence of China, and they wrote the blueprint for the communist conquest of China in the secret agreement at Yalta. There you see Stalin, FDR, etc. George Marshall, who was the Secretary of State and also served as Secretary of War, bragged that he disarmed our ally, the leader of the Free Chinese, Chiang Kai-shek, with a stroke of a pen. They literally put an arms embargo on the man who was trying to protect China from a Chinese communist takeover. This is the guy, Chiang Kai-shek, who fought alongside Americans against the Japanese in World War II. My granddaddy fought alongside Chiang Kai-shek's men. Subversive elements within our government did this. John F. Kennedy talked about it on the floor of Congress. He said the responsibility for our failure in the Far East rests with the White House and the Department of State. He said what our young men saved, our diplomats and our president frittered away. Now, the U.S. Communist Party is very, very much in line with the Communist Chinese. The head, John Bachtel, went over to China and bragged about the New World Order that China was building. It's a peaceful rise of China. He said their system of participatory and consultative democracy is unique. China's an evolving democracy, right? So anytime you hear commies talk about democracy, you should raise alarm bells, right? And they're very, very pleased that they think this is the system that's taking over the country. And by the way, that same guy, John Bachtel, bragged that the Communist Party USA utilizes the Democrat Party to implement its agenda in America. Now, you know the three co-founders of Black Lives Matter, actual trained Marxists, as they admit on TV. Here's one of them, Alicia Garza, one of the three co-founders. Listen. Well, we've got the video timestamp wrong, but she says, what's at stake in the 2020 election is the creation of our new world order. So the elites, the rabble-rousers on the street, they're all in favor. Now, at the highest levels, our government has been compromised. Some of you might remember Chinagate. We were supposed to forget about it after Monica Lewinsky surfaced. But in Chinagate, Bill Clinton got caught, the DNC got caught taking CCP money through Johnny Chung in order to betray our country, hand over our most sensitive military technology and secrets. They got caught! That's treason. Okay. The U.S. Admiral Thomas Moore, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said President Clinton promised to restrain those men who ordered the Tiananmen Square massacre, but now he has allowed those men whose hands are stained with the blood of the martyrs of freedom into the highest reaches of our military defenses and made available to them significant portions of our advanced military technology. Barack Obama was actually training communist Chinese troops on American soil. Happened more than once. The communist Chinese were funneling millions of dollars into the Clinton initiative. I wonder why they would do that. But don't think I'm picking on Democrats. They've got Republicans on the payroll too. Former House Speaker John Boehner working for a lobbying firm that represents communist Chinese interests. Bush is on the payroll. They are everywhere. Now, you might remember Hunter Biden's laptop that we were told was Russian disinformation. Here's one of the audio files that they pulled from there. Listen to Hunter Biden talk about his relationship with the spy chief of Communist China. Well, again, the video got messed up. But he's talking about how, hey, I've got a business deal, a partnership with the head of Communist Chinese intelligence. We know now the House has released the documents that multiple members of the Biden crime family have been receiving enormous payments from the CCP. How can this be happening and we're not even talking about it? Di Dongsheng from the CCP brags that they have friends, and they had friends up until Donald Trump came to power, in America's core circle of power, bragging about this, okay? They're buying off our media. They're giving millions of dollars openly. They don't even do it through a disguise. Even some of our allegedly conservative media outlets are getting millions of dollars from the CCP to publish their propaganda. They're flying their journalists over there, whining and dining them. It is every institution in our society. They're buying up Hollywood. They're buying up cinema chains. Everywhere you look. And it's happening with the deliberate participation of people at the highest levels in our society. So what do we do about it? In the last couple minutes we have left, well, we need to start off by having a correct diagnosis, right? If you go into a doctor and doesn't recognize you have a problem, well, you're not going to be able to solve the problem. So you have to diagnose the problem correctly. We need to understand that this is much bigger than just the CCP. The CCP is a major threat to humanity and to liberty and to the United States today as a direct result of a fifth column subversives within our country, within our business community, within our government, who have deliberately aided and abetted the rise of the Communist Chinese from even before they took over that great empire. So we have to diagnose the problem correctly. As the great Chinese military strategist said, Sun Tzu, if you know you're the enemy and you know yourself, you don't need to fear the result of 100 battles. But if you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you'll also suffer a defeat. If you don't know your enemy or yourself, you will succumb in every battle. And that is a perfect description of where we are right now as Americans. We don't know who we are. We don't know our Constitution. We don't know our founding documents. We don't know our history. We don't have any idea who the enemy is. We think it's the guy across the street who watches too much CNN and put out a Biden sign in his front yard. Right? It's so much bigger than that, guys. We've got to understand who we are, who is the enemy, or we will lose. And when we talk about Marxism, this is not just an economic ideology. It is straight from the pit of hell. And if I had to recommend one book, I've read a lot of books on Marxism, but if I had to recommend one, it would be this one by Pastor Richard Wurmbrand, who spent 9 years being tortured by communist savages in Romania. What he found out was that Marx was not quite the atheist that they want you to believe. This is a diabolical plot from the beginning. Right? Everything God ordained, family, nations, marriage, private property, every single point is under attack by the Marxists, so you know where it's coming from. We must protect our children from the dumbing down, the indoctrination that is happening with the deliberate connivance and assistance of the Communist Chinese. I encourage you to get involved in the political process, but ultimately we need to recognize that this is much more than a political battle. It's much more than a military battle. It is at its core a spiritual battle. We are up against the forces of evil. The Communist Chinese represent one component of that, but ultimately even behind them, as the Apostle Paul says in Ephesians 6, we're dealing with principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, and against spiritual wickedness in high places. If we want to stop this evil, we have to recognize that. And the way to do it, God told us, take the shield of faith, take the armor, and then take the sword of the Spirit. That's the Word of God. That's the Bible. And that is our truth. That's our rock that we stand on. That is our offensive weapon in this battle. We must use it or we will be defeated. And the good news is God's already got it under control, but we have to do our part. Thank you, guys, and God bless you.
Anyone have a question? We can have time for a question or two. Janine's up first.
Thank you so much for all you're doing. I asked you earlier about this UN meeting you attended, and I read the article about it. And you said that in that article that 26 governors had come out opposing it, and then you laid out a strategy for counties. Can you please share that with us here? I think it's critical because that's something we all have the ability to do in our own counties.
Yeah, thank you for that. And, unfortunately, right now, the federal government is totally out of control, but we do still have a lot of influence left at the state and at the local level. And so I would urge everybody to work with your state lawmakers, work with your county officials to protect the American people, to protect our rights from all of this evil. Collier County, I just had the chairman of the county commission on my program last week, I believe, and they just passed not a resolution, but an ordinance stating that this is a constitutional county. No orders from the United Nations will be respected or adhered to in this county. No unconstitutional acts by the federal government will be tolerated in this county, and we need that at the state level and at the federal level all across this country. We do have about half of the nation's governors came out publicly and said they will not comply with WHO rulings and decrees. We need the other 25 to come along and do that as well. But we need state laws to do this as well. Louisiana has passed a really, really good example banning WHO decisions within their state. Back in 2012, Alabama unanimously, every Democrat voted in favor of a law banning UN Agenda 21. So we've got to have a lot more of that, and that is a very effective way that we can resist this tyranny from the federal government, from the UN, and from whatever source it may come.
Can we find copies of those ordinances or state laws and resolutions? Are they available for us to find?
Yes, they're available on the public website for Collier County. I also have it available on my website at libertysentinel.org. You can find it there, and you can find the interview with Chris Hall. It's about half an hour, the chairman of the county commission. And in your state, in Nevada, several counties have already become constitutional counties. In New York, we've had counties do that. I've written about it pretty extensively in the Epic Times and in other publications. So I would encourage you to work at the state and the county level to get these kinds of things put in place.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Janine.
you.
Orlean?
Two questions. I am really concerned about the number of Chinese who have crossed over the border. We have no idea where they're going, but they seem to be all young military age Chinese. I wondered if you have the numbers, how many there are, and then are there any constitutional counties in California?
As far as I know, there are no constitutional counties in California yet, although the effort is getting started there. There are school boards that are pushing back on the craziness. As for the Communist Chinese operatives coming across our border, nobody really knows the exact number, but it is massive. Mark Morgan was talking earlier about the open border. The Communist Chinese have sent huge numbers of special forces across that border. They are now all across the United States. They're keeping their heads down for the most part. They're working as busboys, as cooks, as drivers. No speeding tickets, no nothing. And they are getting ready for instructions from the motherland. So we need to be very aware of this. They are spying on Chinese dissidents in this country. They are spying on the American people. They're spying on our military. It is absolutely out of control. And when the time comes, they have blueprints for our water treatment facilities, for our power plants. And the plan is, if they get their way, to wreak absolute havoc on our country. So we have got to take this threat seriously, and unfortunately, the current administration is not doing that.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Appreciate that.